This is my beginning algebra course. Today you're going to take test number 3 of the course. If you haven't done the homework completely and correctly from the last class, do that homework before watching this video. I want to warn you again that you cannot pass a math exam without doing all the homework that leads up to the exam. And you cannot pass a math exam unless you study for at least 2 or 3 days before the exam. There are some subjects where you can study an hour the night before and you'll pass the exam. Liberal arts subjects mostly. But if you try to pull that type of stuff with science or math courses, I promise you that you'll fail. Also, it's important that you study properly. A lot of students will simply look at their math problems and say to themselves, well, I know how to do that one. And they'll go on to another problem and just look at it and say, well, I know how to do that one. And then they'll take the test. If you study that way, then you're going to fail. It's a 100% guarantee that you will fail the test. In order to study for math tests properly, you have to do all of the problems to make sure that you know how to do them. That's the way math works. You have to do it in order to make sure that you're fluent with the problems. So that said, there are 25 questions for this test as usual. Each question is worth 4 points. On this test, there's only 25 questions, no questions that have multiple parts. As you can see, I have the instructions on how to grade your test. So you may want to review this before you take the test. Some important differences here. As usual, you want to subtract half the points in every problem where the answer is either wrong or not written. But for some problems, you're going to have some correct answers, but other answers are going to be extraneous. If you forget to exclude extraneous solutions, then I want you to subtract 1 point for every extraneous solution that you write. That's only if some of the answers are correct. If it turns out that all of the answers are incorrect, then of course I want you to subtract half the points. And if you write solutions to a problem that actually has no solutions, then I want you to subtract half the points. Some of these problems are going to have extraneous solutions. And of course, if you don't attempt the problem at all because you don't know how to do it, then I want you to subtract 4 points, all of the points. And if the work that you did that led up to the problem, if all that work is incorrect, then I want you to subtract half the points, which means you're going to lose all the points. Again, just be aware, some of these problems have extraneous solutions. For example, if you end up with something like x squared or 3x plus 5 squared equals negative 5, that's impossible. You can't have a square that's equal to a negative. Another example so there would be no solution to that problem. Other examples are if you have something like 3 over 4 minus x equals 2 plus 1 over x, and one of your answers is 4. So let's say you do the algebra and you come up with 4. Well, that's an extraneous solution. That's not a solution, because if you plug it back into this equation, you can see we're going to get 0 in the denominator. So any solution that gives you 0 in a denominator is going to be an extraneous solution. These are all things that you should know before you take this test. The third example of extraneous solutions is when you have a root that's equal to a negative number. That's also not possible, just because the definition of this notation excludes negative numbers. There's no interesting explanation to that other than it's just traditional. It's just traditional that a root is always equal to a positive. If you have something like root x minus 8 equals negative 10, that's impossible. So there would be no solution to that equation. But again, some equations will have solutions, real solutions, and other solutions that are extraneous. So you got to be aware of that. Also, if you have an equation like 3x minus 6 is equal to 5, 3x minus 6 squared is equal to 5, then obviously you have to square root both sides, and you'd end up with, you square root both sides, and you'd need to put a plus or minus. Whenever you square root both sides, you have to put a plus or minus. If you don't put the plus or minus, then you're going to lose 1 point. And I didn't mention that, now that I think of it, I didn't mention that in the main body of the instructions, but I'll go over that again when we talk about how to grade your test. So if your answers are missing that plus and minus, and again, that plus and minus has to go with the root 5 wherever it goes. So the final answer we'd add 6 to both sides, divide both sides by 3, but wherever that root 5 goes, the plus or minus has to follow. So just be aware of that. All right, so all that said, clear everything off your desk as usual. You should have no computer, no textbooks, no internet, no one helping you. You need to do this on your own. You should have a piece of paper and a pencil or your digital notebook or whatever you're using. Don't use your notes from my other classes. You got to do this on your own. The whole point of this is to make sure that you know the material. If you're using all these other instructional materials to help you, then obviously you don't know the material. And this test is a complete waste of our time. So you're gonna need between 1 and 2 hours. Don't be surprised if the test takes 2 hours, because this is a difficult test. And each problem is going to take a lot of your concentration, so this is going to be a challenge. Remember, this is beginning algebra. Beginning algebra is a difficult course, so do not be surprised if you start to find out that this material is fairly difficult, if you haven't figured that out already. So again, you can look at these instructions, and now let's go ahead and look at the test. Here's the test. Go ahead and take a screenshot of these pages. There's only 2 pages for the test. Be sure to read the instructions, and you want to time yourself, so be sure to have a timer. It shouldn't take any longer than 2 hours. So go ahead and pause the video and take the test, and when you're done taking the test, push play and we'll talk about how to grade your test. All right, we're back. So you should be done with the test. Let me give you the answers. Here's the answers. So get a screenshot of those answers. And let's talk a little bit about how to grade your test. Notice that with some of these problems, you have an extraneous solution. Here, this is an extraneous solution. So if you wrote this as one of your solutions, you need to subtract 1 point. And if you didn't write either of these solutions, then obviously you subtract 2 points. And if you didn't even attempt the problem, or if all the work that you did for the problem was incorrect, then of course you subtract 4 points. You can write the fraction form for this problem, or you can write the decimal form. It doesn't matter. Either answer is correct. On some of these problems, you needed to write plus or minus. If you wrote just a plus and not a minus, then you need to subtract 1 point. For example, here you need a plus or minus here. You need to subtract 1 point if you only wrote the plus. What else can I say about this? Let's see here. More plus or minus problems. There was an extraneous solution on this problem. So if you wrote x is equal to, if you I don't know what you would do here, but if you wrote some answer there, then that's an extraneous solution. So subtract a point if you wrote those extraneous solutions. If you wrote x equals 7 for number 22, subtract 2 points, because that's not the solution. There is no solution to that problem. This is an extraneous solution. We have another extraneous solution. If you wrote x equals 8, subtract a point. That's not a solution. X equals 2 is the only solution. So go ahead and grade your paper. When you're done, we'll talk about your how to score, or how to interpret the grade, or calculate your grade for the test. All right, we're back. If you scored 90 to 100, you got an A. An A means that you know the material really, really well. If you scored 80 to 89, that means you got a B. That means you know the material, but you have some minor issues you have to work on. If you scored 70 to 79, you got a C. That means you know the material, but you have some major issues you need to work on. And if you scored anything below a 70, that means you don't know the material, and you need to do a lot of problems to make sure that you know the material. If you pass the exam, then I'm proud of you. You can go on to the next class in the course. If you didn't pass, then again, that just means that you need to look in your textbook and do tons and tons and tons of problems, and maybe take a practice test in your textbook or something along those lines before you go forward in this class, because you can't just keep failing these exams and think that you're going to learn the material. You can't refuse to do the homework and think that you're going to learn the material. And by the way, a lot of students are going to do the homework, and they're going to study for the exams, but they're just going to pretend. A lot of students like to pretend to do the homework and pretend to study for the exams, but they don't really do the work. If you pretended, that means you wasted your time and you wasted my time. So don't tell me that you studied for the exam when you really didn't. This is not make-believe. Don't complain if you failed the exam, because, again, 99% of the time, the reason that students fail exams is because they just didn't study. They didn't take it seriously. So with that said, that was exam number 3, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next class.